Okay, so hey everybody, it's Dave here on the live stream. Dave from Comic Book Herald. I am joined today by Sarah Century, my guest, excellent writer at Comic Book Herald, the co-host of Bitches on Comics podcast, which is excellent. I'm very excited to have Sarah here with us. Sarah, can you introduce yourself, tell people where they can find you, and then everybody in the chat, if you can let us know, how audio sounds, if we're sounding okay, that would be awesome.
Yes, so I can be found on twitter.com /Sarah Century. There's no H in Sarah, nor is there an H in Century. I stole that joke, by the way, from John Wilson from the Make Ours Marvel podcast. But you can find me at sarahcentury.com as well. I am a critic. I write for Comic Book Herald often, yes, and then also a lot of other websites. And and I'm a horror writer, so there's a whole bunch of fiction stuff happening in my life as well. But that's it.
Absolutely, awesome. Okay, so let's see. I'm trying to figure out what the audio sounds great. We're getting from Micah there. Thank you in the chat. Thanks everybody who's hopped on. So today we're going to talk. This is going to be a special edition, kind of an expanded edition of Krakin Krakoa, which is me going through the Hickman era of X-Men. On my own speed, what I'm going to be doing on these. So this is kind of the start of our '90s X-Men reading club. Okay. And it's going to be a more casual conversation. I'm going to try and bring in some cool guests like Sarah to just talk through different different historical comics that basically happened throughout the 1990s. So the reading lists that we're putting together for this, I've shared them out via YouTube here. You can find them on Comic Book Herald's Patreon and the Comic Book Herald newsletter. There's a lot of different ways you can get access if you want to know hey, what comics are we talking about today, including in the description of this video, which is, this is a bigger one because we're going to talk about a whole bunch of Acts of Vengeance crossovers. But the general idea here is we're just going to progress chronologically, starting in very late 1989 into 1990, and then we're going to progress through the 1990s, and it's our X-Men 90s reading club, okay? So we're not literally going to read everything that came out in the 90s because, I have some desire to see family and friends. Some, it's small, but it does exist. But, we're going to read a curated selection through some of the bigger stuff, okay? And if you're familiar with some of my other work, I do the My Marvelous Year podcast through CBH. In that, we go through Marvel Comics from its origins to today. We are up to 1990 right now on the My Marvelous Year pod there. We will be reading more X-Men stuff in the 90s X-Men Reading Club than you would get in just My Marvelous Year. So if you are playing along with both, this is an opportunity for us to expand the amount of X-Men that we're talking about, and also to dig into what are the current day connections, okay, to what's going on. So if you have questions in the chat, I think we do have the super chat set up too. If you definitely want us to make sure we tackle them. Questions can pertain to 90s X-Men, to Acts of Vengeance, but also if you're hey, I have a theory about how this connects to Dawn of X, or I just have a Dawn of X, Reign of X, Hickman X-Men era question, that's fair game, I would say. So I'm not going to go out of my way to spoil stuff, but definitely I want it to be talked about through the lens of what's going on present day. Okay, so if you are absolutely no spoilers, I don't want to hear anything to do with what's going on in comics, in 2021. I would say this is probably not the conversation for you. I would push you to the My Marvelous Year podcast. That one is one where we are firmly rooted in the past. Sarah, how caught up are you? How actively pursuing are you on Reign of X stuff?
Reign of X, I am so behind. So yeah, definitely. Yeah. But I have noticed more and more of my friends picking it up. So that's something. And also I have enjoyed the lead-in. So I'm gonna get caught up very soon. Okay,
cool. Yeah, no, I know you're familiar with House and Powers, and you've written some stuff for us on CBH about The Great Pretender. Certainly.
Oh yes.
So I know you have
Wanda.
Yeah, the beloved Wanda. Which you, if people haven't checked it out, I would recommend. We did a review on Comic Book Herald. Sarah, Ken Lasker, and myself on WandaVision after the season finale. That was a fun one, and I've heard tell that it covered a lot of the bases. So I feel like people were pretty satisfied.
I think it was good to have 3 people talk about it.
It helped me for sure. Yeah, no, I've been enjoying the conversation format I think as popularized by Comics XF. Definitely has done a great job with it.
And We'll Walk.
On their
I've seen
site.
them do it too.
Yeah.
Women Write About Comics.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so now I should have on the stream, look at this, got a slideshow rolling, Acts of Vengeance, got the whole, I don't have my background in yet, maybe if I get a little break here, but let's get to it, okay? So thanks everybody for joining, thanks for your patience, for those of you who have been with us from the beginning, I really appreciate it. We can dig in now into the comics that we are actually reading today. So to start things off, all right, Acts of Vengeance is a late 1989 into 1990 event, right? And it is unlike any event Marvel had done to this point, because it is more thematically linked than it is, like an actual, read this event issue, then this event issue, and on down the line, right? Instead, what it is there's sort of a tie between all the issues together, in that there's these acts of vengeance pertain to various villains of the Marvel Universe are gathered together to take down the heroes, and the plan that they have to do so is basically to say, all right, let's mix it up. Captain America's used to beating down on the Red Skull, let's put him up against some villains that he's not used to. And on down the line, for example, like Daredevil very famously fights Ultron during the Anna Senti John Romita Jr. run. Those are two very good issues. We get Punisher versus Doctor Doom. So you get matchups, and you get sort of villain v hero takedowns that are different than what we had seen generally in Marvel to that point. I would say Acts of Vengeance was a bit ahead of the curve in this regard. It's a thing that Marvel does a lot now, as they look to spice up, some 60, 70 years of continuity. But it's honestly, it's like very loosely connected, but it's also kind of fun because of that, because the creators kind of just get to tell their stories generally. They kind of get to move their comic forward, but under this banner of Acts of Vengeance, and that's what we see on the X-Men side of things as well. So today we're going to talk about the X-Men piece of that as it pertains to Uncanny X-Men, New Mutants, X-Factor, Captain America actually has a really good kind of X-Men connection, and Wolverine, and then maybe a little Amazing Spider-Man if we have time, because there's some Sebastian Shaw stuff in there.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the fun thing about Acts of Vengeance, is it kind of just pops up anywhere. Sarah, we were talking a little bit before we started here, you were saying that you were reading through a bunch of this. What were your reactions to Acts of Vengeance as a whole, and just kind of this event/non-event, this interesting period in Marvel?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. It is not a cohesive crossover.
No.
Just to say the very least. It is truly kind of a wreck even. And that's kind of what's fun about it. It is very much, as I was saying before, a tour through 1989/1990 for sure. This is all of the Image guys are still at Marvel, we see right. Liefeld on New Mutants, all of this stuff. And it is real goofy and real fun as a whole, I would say. I loved the Quasar one that was just villain after villain just kind of showing up, and Quasar explaining his powers at length. And yep, just all of them. I mean, they were goofy and fun. It reminds me a lot of whenever I was first getting into comics, right? I was a little kid, and I remember being so into this stuff.
Yeah, no, there's a very innocent, if through some of it, there's a very innocent, ooh, what about this versus this? Kind of just those fun, comic shop conversations, or what I imagined comic shop conversations were before I went to a comic shop and I found they were nothing like that. But just kind of that what would happen if it's Punisher versus Doctor Doom, or Magneto versus Red Skull, and all these different fun things. Yeah, you're spot on. I think the premise too, so you have Loki is pretending to be Loki's pretending to not be Loki, even though he's clearly Loki. He's pretending to be this kind of businessman, executive kind of guy who brings all these villains together. So he brings together Magneto, Red Skull, Kingpin, the Mandarin, who is rocking some spiky costume design. That is, I rarely consider with the Mandarin, but that's what he's got. And then you got the Wizard, who is clearly the one where they were well, I guess we should get a Fantastic Four villain. And Doctor Doom, of course, who I didn't mention. So it's kind of a who's who. It's a mashup of a B tier, but then also a who's who of Marvel villains, and they're kind of the ones pulling the strings. and orchestrating like what is actually happening. So let's start here with on the X-Men side of things, kind of a little background for like where we are, but then also kind of what this means for Uncanny X-Men, because that's obviously the central title at this point in time, written by Chris Claremont. So going into late '89 into 1990, Chris Claremont had been on Uncanny X-Men since approximately 1976. Okay, and 1989 was the year of Inferno. So this was the year we had the massive Inferno event crossover, a true event crossover, right, in a way that Acts of Vengeance is not. After that, Uncanny X-Men gets into a really weird and interesting and different place. They start spinning around, like the X-Men go to Australia, or they're sort of living in Australia during this time period, but they also, the team's kind of like just missionless almost, like in many ways Claremont's X-Men is building from like post-Dark Phoenix saga to 1989. It's like almost all build to Inferno in a way. Like if you look back and kind of some of the seeds in Madeline Pryor and Magic and all those seeds, like that all gets delivered in Inferno. And then after that point, it's kind of like, okay, what is X-Men going to be now? And that's kind of where we find them in Acts of Vengeance. And then the one detail I should mention too, before we talk about the Uncanny issues in particular, is the X-Men had literally just gone through the Siege Perilous. Okay, and this is a semi-controversial portion of the, I guess it'll be a semi-controversial kind of day as we talk about this, but like semi-controversial portion of the Claremont narrative in the sense of fans not really digging the Siege Perilous idea, which basically was the X-Men go through this mystical artifact. It's like King Arthurian in nature, okay? And they go through this thing, and the X-Men unit of the time, Colossus, Havoc, Psylocke, Wolverine, Rogue, Storm, not all of them go through it, but that's kind of the unit, and Dazzler, Longshot. They go through the Siege Perilous, and they all wind up like separate. They all wind up separated, and they don't really remember who they are. They all kind of wind up in different scenarios, alone, kind of like a chance at a new life, essentially, is what the Siege Perilous grants them, okay? And that is where we find Psylocke here, Betsy Braddock, when she comes into this very surreal, very strange, and then immensely influential, if controversial, story that Chris Claremont and Jim Lee, the artist, tell across Uncanny X-Men 256 to 258. Sarah, had you read the official transformation of Betsy Braddock to the body of an Asian woman in Psylocke before this point?
For sure. Yeah, I definitely have read this story. Actually, I believe I wrote about it at a certain point for maybe Sci-Fi a while ago.
Yeah.
But it is a very wild story, and it would go on to just influence their collective stories, right, for such a long time.
Right.
Only recently have they been separated again. And that's for the best,
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like the whole time, they're both such interesting characters, but I like the fact that now they can have individual attention again, whereas a lot of, because wasn't this like, it's still before a lot of the backstory is discovered, so instead we just see that Betsy is in this body and there's no other context for it from what I remember. Is that true?
I think that's accurate. So like,
and then later they do the story where it's just like a whole other actual character, right? Like,
yeah.
So, I mean, either way, it's a pretty offensive idea, I would say. I'm just kind of glad that it's over, I guess. But I had definitely read these before. I've read these multiple times, honestly. Like, I've gone through the Claremont X-Men probably like 3 or 4 times.
Okay, yeah. No, gotcha. No, and it's a complicated story. So it's complicated on 2 fronts. It's complicated on a narrative front because it's dreamlike and weird, just on a basic like what is happening level. It's a little bit strange, but then it's also complicated in obviously the ramifications and what is happening in terms of, okay, you have a character in Betsy Braddock, Elizabeth Braddock, who has been in Marvel now since, for over a decade as a white English woman. and now they're putting her consciousness, they being the Hand, and at the behest of the Mandarin, okay, and they're putting her consciousness in a female Asian assassin's body, okay. So just right off the bat, there's a lot of like, okay, like what are the racial implications of that? That this story is never super interested in dealing with, you know, like that's not really something that I don't think the creators really set out to tackle. And Claremont kind of has a history with doing stuff like this, because he does it in New Mutants in the Demon Bear saga too, where Tom Corsi and I think it's Sharon Friedlander, like kind of these supporting players, they are transformed into Native Americans or like Native American bodies, however that manifests. So it's this thing of like, he's doing it for the visual aesthetic almost, you know, more than any like actually dealing with like, well, what would that mean and like what would that be like? Which honestly the fact that they didn't have like big like a very special episode kind of issues is probably for the best. I don't think those would have played very well. But yes, to your point, Sarah, Betsy is this is the issue, or this is the story where she comes into the body of Psylocke, as like many readers then knew the character for a long time. And what's crazy to me is, you know, Betsy was known for a whole decade as a white Englishwoman, but then the 90s Jim Lee drawn ninja assassin becomes the definitive version of this character for so long, until, like you said, until I think it was 2018, when finally Marvel was like, yeah, these are two different people. Let's put Betsy back in her original body, and let's give Kwanan, as the character was then later established, I believe, by writer Fabian Nicieza in like the early 90s X-Men. Maybe we'll talk about those sagas as we go through this 90s X-Men reading club. But they were like, okay, these are two different people, let's tell their two different stories. And that's what we've seen in the Dawn of X, right? Where we've seen Kwanan be, she was in Fallen Angels, of course, but then be
and
used
Hellions.
And Hellions, which is great. I love what's happening with the character there. And then obviously Betsy is, I mean, the main character, Captain Britain of Excalibur. So I think that has been, I would say, definitely a successful split. I think it's a successful split too, because you keep Kwanan. I think like the one saving grace maybe in a way for Psylocke undergoing this transformation was that it did actually give like Asian representation to the X-Men, which is something that, you know, to have like this strong Asian woman, I think, and I've read this, so this is not just me like theorizing, just from various Asian women from different readers. Like I read they have some good content on Women Write About Comics about this. Just the idea of like Claremont's X-Men actually historically compared to the rest of Marvel is pretty good at having different representation across the unit. I mean, in a lot of ways, that's a big hook of the all new, all different X-Men. Like just that first unit is like they're a global team. And Psylocke at least taps into that without, I don't know if that's like ever really the intent, you know? So it's almost like an unintended positive effect. But then, the flip side of that coin is sort of a weird fetishization of just like,
and it's always like a compromise, right? Like that's kind of the deal is that, yeah, of course, Psylocke is a major part of representation, but also at what cost,
side
right?
Of that coin is
there's always like some
sort
kind
of a weird fetishization
thing behind it that makes it be kind of questionable, and that's what you see a lot in comics for a long time. I'm glad that things are kind of getting adjusted,
Right, yeah. No, I hear you on that. One sec, let me. Yeah. So, all right. So, in this story, I think it's for the best that change has happened. This is the official Acts of Vengeance storyline where the change does occur. I mean, it's honestly like the way the story ends up. It's kind of just bringing Psylocke and Wolverine together again. At post Siege Perilous. Mandarin doesn't actually play a very big role in this at all, despite being the villain that Psylocke is, I guess, like designed for. Like the hand is trying to win his favor, so they create this version of Psylocke. They're trying to brainwash her. Ultimately, she breaks out of it after Wolverine and Jubilee show up. This is a fun era too of Wolverine and Jubilee, just kind of like they meet for the first time and then they kind of team up. And so this is after Jubilee has freed Wolverine from the Reavers attack, because they were torturing him in Australia. And Jubilee is already, she sneaks onto the base after the famous Girls' Night Out issue of X-Men, and she's there and she kind of helps him escape. But Wolverine's super beat up. He's beat to heck after this. And they go to Madripoor, kind of Wolverine's home base. Wolverine's a wreck. He's hearing voices. He's hearing Carol Danvers, Nick Fury, maybe one other one. And Jubilee's kind of like guiding him along. They're a fun pairing. I do like that, Wolverine's continued progression from, there's always like a young teenage girl that he's kind of mentoring, but never in a particularly creepy way, so he had like Kitty for a while, and now he's kind of moved on to Jubilee. And it's a good introduction. I always kind of forget that like Jubilee starts out as a really strong character. I really like her as this kind of goofy teen that like invades the X-Men. They never like invite her; she just shows up, but she always holds her own. Because my perception of that character is like very 90s animated series based,
Sure.
Which isn't wrong per se, but it's also like she shows up a lot more her own character and her own deal, and I like her in the comics a little better, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, they give her more to do, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always that. Also, Claremont has a very specific idea in mind for how she's going to, have the gift of gab and be somebody who's just always kind of popping off. So I think that was such an important character trait for her that it's really what makes her fun. So whenever you watch the animated series, she does have those really great one-liners. Like, does a mall babe eat chili fries and things like that? Like, she has good lines. But, we really do lose something because she's a pretty complicated character in the comics. You see somebody who's tough, but, like, vulnerable and, very funny, like a hilarious dialogue all of the time that just doesn't quit. And so that, to me, we're seeing, like, the Jubilee here pretty much.
Right. No, absolutely. And she's got this, like, it always makes me wonder, like, is she using slang that people used in anywhere? Like, or is this all invented? It feels, right.
It's not real. It's totally just, like, Claremont being Claremont. He probably, like, because he had daughters, right? So, like, they must have been adults by this time.
Yeah.
Who knows? This is all blind speculation, but I'm definitely just like, no, how would Claremont know?
Right. And I think I kind of prefer that. Like, if you're an older dude writing a younger character, literally make up a language rather than try to capture the spirit of how the teens talk. Like, I actually think that's a better feel. Okay, cool. So Uncanny X-Men 256, 258, definitely worth the read. I mean, this whole era is fascinating, I think. Like we said, it has these huge ramifications for Betsy Braddock's character and then what will become Quanon, like, as we'll learn, but that's not really in place yet. It was interesting, because I was reading up on this, kind of like, okay, is this shift into an Asian woman's body? Like, how have critics kind of reacted to this and what has been said on the subject? And there's some really good reading on it. I'll try to include, I'll try to include some pieces in the show notes. There's an article by Jennifer de Guzman, just kind of about like how the mixture of identity that Psylocke undergoes is something that resonated with her as an Asian American. So I'll try to include that for people who are interested. But there was an interview or a quote that Chris Claremont gave to Women Write About Comics, where he effectively was like, basically they were like, why'd you do this? And he was like, well, I never intended for it to last as long as it did. Was kind of Claremont's quote, where he was like, basically like, I thought we'd do these 3 issues, and then they're like, we like the costume, we like design, we like Jim Lee's ability to draw it, so we're like, all right, let's run with it. The thing that he never factored into the equation was that Jim Lee would then be on X-Men longer than he was. Like, he didn't think he'd ever leave because he was the X-Men guy for forever and ever. And then the way this the history progresses here is, in 1991, Chris Claremont and Jim Lee's X-Men number 1 through 3, that's it for Claremont. Then he's done for a stretch, and he's come back since, but he's never really been the guy since then, And then kind of the plans for Psylocke just never got changed until 2018.
Yeah, it definitely went on longer than it needed to. But I will say that Psylocke in these issues is really fun to watch whenever you kind of remove it, I guess, from its context. But you can watch her just kind of fight. She has the really cool like
Psylocke
Lady
just
Mandarin.
Never got changed until
Lady
2018.
Mandarin. And I'm just like, that is rad. There's like a few things that are pretty rad in this. I love the fight scenes. I love the fight with Wolverine, I think, is great. The fight with the Mandarin is great,
Yeah.
So I like those aspects of it. I think that it does still definitely, like, look at that cover. Look at, like, how great the covers are. There's like some nice things about the narrative for Uncanny X-Men. I would say that the action scenes really sell it.
Yeah, no, and and that's the thing too. We didn't really touch on a ton. Is like Jim Lee is becoming a known entity. Like Jim Lee is becoming a big deal in these pages and kind of in this era. It is like you mentioned up front. We've got Lee, we've got Liefeld coming on to New Mutants. We've got McFarlane, kind of doing some covers and doing a lot in Spidey in this era. This is, that era of the Image guys not yet being superstars, but clearly progressing and clearly drawing comics in a way that like a lot of people weren't. Like you can tell just that progression. And yeah, like the fact that these are Jim Lee comics, it's like, oh, okay, we're heading into a new era of X-Men visually. For better and for worse, definitely there are moments where it's just like super fun to watch at, but then there's also like on a narrative panel to panel basis, sometimes it can be like, okay, this is this is kind of weird looking, like it's hard to follow.
Yeah.
But some stuff just looks cool as hell, like you're saying. So
it's true. I think that it comes up. We'll talk about it soon in the New Mutants, where it's like,
Yeah. So all right. So let's move into that. Let's tackle Wolverine first because I don't think this will take super long. So this is the Wolverine's 2 issues, 19 and 20. We talked about him being in Madripoor. So this is written by Archie Goodwin. It's actually got pencils by John Byrne and inks by Klaus Janson, which is pretty. So it's a nice looking book. It's Wolverine versus Tiger Shark in a very kind of small sort of like Wolverine busts up a drug heist, which I feel like is the vast. I don't know. Are you a big Wolverine solo series fan? It's one that I can never quite get into it, even though I feel like I should like it more than I do. I don't like Patch, Madripoor, Wolvie,
Yeah, I'm going to say real hit and miss. Some of the issues are really great. I read it a ton whenever I was a kid. So I believe once it was in like the late 70s or something, I was picking it up regularly.
Yeah.
And, a lot of ninja fights, a bunch of stuff going on. There's things that are, once again, it's the same as all of these comics where not always do you want to think about it for too long because that way lies, it's not the best way to go. But like whenever you just kind of watch Wolverine kind of going wild and, fighting a bunch of people and all of that stuff, there's just fun stuff in it. And I think that was when they started trying to make like Landu, Luckman, and Lake happen. And So and I think like one of the Kuberts was drawing it, so it looked pretty great. This is like later era.
Yeah.
But when I reread the early Wolverine comics, I'm like, yeah, this is mostly not what I would consider to be required reading. And I feel kind of the same about these issues, though I did really like that Tiger Shark shows up.
Yes, I think Tiger Shark's a pretty fun villain. I like him integrated into the Acts of Vengeance. I think with Wolverine too, I don't know, historically I always like him better on the team unit of the X-Men. I mean, I think this winds up being true for a majority of X-Men, and it's part of the reason why, they exist so well as a unit, obviously, and kind of then struggle to have, it's like, why doesn't Storm have a solo, or why doesn't Cyclops have a solo? And it's like, a lot of times they actually just function better as parts of these teams, or at least, generally speaking, with the stories that have been told. Doesn't mean there can't be better ones going forward. I kind of have that feel with Wolverine as well, even though he always, obviously, is going to get the ability to have a solo, just given his profile. But
which is kind of a bummer sometimes, right? Like, it's just kind of too much of him.
Yeah, no, it definitely can be.
But we would feel that way, especially post like the year like 1990, right? Like post that, we're talking about like just constant Wolverine everywhere. So
right.
It's okay if he doesn't have a solo sometimes, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and that's a book that's going on right now that I'm definitely, I check in and out of, So like on the Krakin Krakoa videos I do, like I will review stuff if I have something to say. I'm like, I'm not going to talk about a comic if it's just like, oh, it's fine. It's like with Wolverine, it feels like it's every other issue where I'm just like, very little happened. I'm like, it's fine, and I don't have a ton to say, so I'm just not going to cover it in depth. And I like it well enough,
Oh, I'm so sorry, but bouncing off of like Laura Kinney, right? It's kind of hard to read Logan's stories now because it's like, I just liked the Laura Kinney stories as Wolverine, and then even like the later X-23, which probably still could have been Wolverine. I liked those so much, I guess, that like Logan, I'm kind of like, I don't know, man.
Right. No, I hear you on that. It's definitely Laura Kinney Wolverine is is where it's at, I think. Looking forward to her being back out of the vault. But okay, so
Yeah.
Wolverine, I don't have a ton more to say there. I think let's talk. Did you get to read the X Factor comics, 49 and 50? Because they are not officially in Marvel Unlimited.
They're not,
Yeah.
but I had read them before, and I read up a little bit about them, and what I realized was this was part of Judgment War, which is like one of the weirdest stories I have ever read.
Yeah, yeah.
And is so hard to follow anyway, that I was just like, and then you all threw Acts of Vengeance on top of it, too. Yeah, I didn't remember it, like, even really applying to Acts of Vengeance.
No.
I just remember it as Judgment War, pretty much.
Well, and that's the funniest thing about X Factor to me is I feel like Louise Simonson, the writer, just wanted nothing to do with Acts of Vengeance. Like, she's so clearly not into tagging into it, but then gives them like 3 to 4 pages that are awesome. You know?
Yeah.
So like, because the Apocalypse
Yeah.
Loki stuff is really great. It's actually
It
like
is.
some of my favorite moments in the event. But the story itself is just the continuation of X Factor Judgment War. It's like Cyclops, blasting a celestial. Like, it's that weird, wild sci-fi stuff. But then it throws in the Acts of Vengeance to be like, oh, by the way, Loki recruited Apocalypse, and Apocalypse just like savaged him and everyone in the event. It's great.
Yeah, which rules. I do remember that, and now it makes so much more sense that it was in Judgment War that happened.
Right.
Because reading, like I said, I didn't reread these, but I remember a lot of them because I totally remember Judgment War being one of the weirdest comics I have ever read. And isn't it like Louise Simonson's on her way out the door, right? Same as Claremont, kind of. Like this is where it's wrapping up for her. She's kind of over it.
Yeah, so she's wrapping on. She's gonna be on X Factor for a bit, and then she's gonna be on New Mutants for a little while because the next entry in the reading club is the debut of Cable in the pages of New Mutants.
Oh, right.
Simonson's still writing at that point, which is crucial because obviously, like, Rob Liefeld gets and takes a lot of the credit for the creation of that character, but Simonson's still there, so she's very much on board, kind of through the end of the New Mutants, like when that's like because it literally ends with 100 and then it becomes X-Force. But yeah, like these are last days for these creators kind of through 1991. So it is interesting seeing them and probably I'd be curious to ask them like if they had a sense of that at this point in time. I think in Claremont's case, like we talked about with the Psylocke quote, probably not. Like probably he didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that they're necessarily like telling stories in such a way that they feel like they're wrapping them or anything like that.
But the tensions were rising, right? Because I was watching this doc that was called Claremont's X-Men, where they kind of just talk about how much editorial stuff they had to deal with, obviously with Shooter, but then whenever who's the editor at this point? Is it
it's Tom DeFalco is the editor.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And then right after this, it's Bob Harris, right? So like there was just like from what I remember, there was like kind of rising editorial tensions during this era.
Yeah. No, it's definitely we're approaching that changing of the guard for sure. But yeah, no, my main takeaway from X Factor was just like these Apocalypse Loki interactions rule. I love that Simonson is like she's kind of like doing a meta like stone throwing at Acts of Vengeance as a whole, where like Apocalypse is literally he's literally like, hey, all these characters are acting out of character, some of them are talking weird, and it's like he's basically commenting on like, yeah, I don't want to play with this. I don't want my characters to be taken by John Byrne or whatever other creators are, touching these things. Like she's out, and it's so obvious, and I kind of love it.
Yeah, I do too. And honestly, that's kind of I really enjoy Simonson's work, and I think that she's only gotten better. I understand that a lot of people are like, her X Factor is not great. Yeah. Well, I see why. I see why you would say that, and I see why you would feel that. I grew up with it as a kid, so I have different emotions. But I would say that I love her work, and yeah, she only got better kind of after she left Marvel. Like a lot of her DC Superman stuff is good, and then whenever she came back to X Factor, it was so good. So I don't know. Judgment War I have a very special place in my heart for, but I had no idea that it was also Acts of Vengeance.
I know. It makes very little sense.
It's so funny. Yeah, it's so funny. I do think that she had a sense of humor about it. I will say that.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, So the other Simonson book that she's writing at this point is New Mutants. So New Mutants 84 to 86 are part of Acts of Vengeance. This is Simonson with pencils by Terry Shoemaker, inks by Al Milgram, got colors by Glynis Oliver. This is another New Mutants in Asgard story, which is definitely kind of a recurring time-tested trope. In this instance, it is them versus Hela, and it's Hela, basically she has taken Danny Moonstar, who is a Valkyrie at this point, became a Valkyrie during the first Asgard crossover, back in mid-'80s, and basically Hela has manipulated Danny into, I forget what they call her, but it's basically like a dark Valkyrie kind of thing.
Yeah.
And she's, manipulating her to her own ends in these fights in Hell, 1L, and in all of Asgard. I definitely was, these are issues that I definitely remember reading and feeling like, I kind of just want to get to Cable. Like, I just want to get to the Cable stuff. I don't know. They don't grab me the way that previous Asgard stories have. There is some interesting stuff, like, for example, like Rain Sinclair's romance with Hrimhari, right. the wolf god of Asgard, because that's that's still relevant. Like they have a kid together. That's the thing that's going on in New Mutants right now. If you're reading the VIL run, which is awesome. So there's little touches of things like that, just kind of these, like, oh yeah, like remember how the New Mutants are like weirdly connected to Asgard, but I don't know, like there's better examples of this story, I guess, in my book.
Oh sure, yeah, it does come across a little bit like filler, but also Danny Moonstar as a Valkyrie, really cool stuff.
Yes, I love Danny as a Valkyrie. That's the thing that's happening there's a King in Black tie-in right now, I think called the Valkyries, and they bring Danny back for that. And that's, I love that. I love that connection. It's a thing that she has that, I mean, like, so few other X-Men even have, where they can just straight up be, like, a kind of a crucial supporting player in, like, a totally separate Marvel universe, Yeah. Like, her status as a Valkyrie is just, like, it's so unique amongst X-Men. It's kind of like Storm with Wakanda, in a way, where it's like, yeah, she has this whole other place, this whole other space to play with. I would love to see more stories like that. So I think aside from those kind of reminders, these New Mutants issues definitely are not my favorite of Acts of Vengeance. And I think, too, the other piece with it is, like, so Acts of Vengeance is, the idea is, like, let's give them villains they don't often fight. The actual core New Mutants team, like, in Asgard fighting Hela, that's actually, like, not that atypical for them in a weird way. So it actually doesn't feel that different. I guess the other piece of the New Mutants that is happening that I do continually find kind of interesting is Freedom Force stuff is just like that whole like Blob, Pyro, Avalanche, Mystique, that whole unit working for the government, working to enforce the Mutant Registration Act. I just always find very odd and very interesting, honestly, because they're Freedom Force for like, I mean, it's like it feels like 6 years or something. Like they do that for a long time in Marvel.
They do, yeah. It's the issue with the Vulture, is that right? And then, Rusty and Skids are the focus of it, which is always just like, oh, you poor bastards.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
Oh my god, you really got put through the ringer through like all of it. And Rusty, did he come back yet? I feel like he's like one of the few that they're going to be like, it's fine if he just stays dead for a while.
I honestly don't know. Yeah, I
don't know what's going on with them. But also, like, this is just, to me, this is the ultimate of the tragedy of their story because, like all of this, like they're trying so hard to be good people and it just bites them in the back, like again and again and again.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. I found it to be very sad. And then, yeah, the Freedom Force is totally still doing this, I guess. Yeah. And then I think that this is towards the end of them being the Freedom Force, though, right?
Yeah, because we're gonna see them again in the Cable issues that come up next in New Mutants, because they're like pursuing Cable hot. It's actually really interesting because it's this whole thing where they're like, it's like the Freedom Force and the Mutant Liberation Front, they kind of come to a head. Like it finally gives Freedom Force like a real challenge, It's like, all right, not only do you work for the government now, but like instead of beating up teens, now you have to actually combat like a real threat, essentially. Yeah. So they do have kind of a final moment, but I think I'm trying to think, it might be right after these issues in Uncanny X-Men, they go to Muir Island, and that's the issues where Legion kills Destiny.
Yeah.
That either already just happened or it's about to happen.
It just happened, I believe, because I think that, it's like, I don't remember what exactly the issue, but I believe it was in like the 260s, maybe 263.
Okay.
This could be wrong, but
yeah, no, I believe it. It's definitely right around here, and it's those to me are like that's like kind of the end of Freedom Force in a way, because it's like when you lose Destiny, it's kind of their first major loss of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously traumatic for Mystique, so it's like that.
I know.
Yeah. Those issues are interesting in retrospect, just given all the prominence of Destiny in those characters now.
Oh man, whenever they bring Destiny back in Hoxpox, I loved it so much.
Yeah.
All of the stuff with her just being like, I'm gonna kill you more. I'm just like, this rules.
Yeah.
I was like, I love the anarchist lesbians that are like setting people on fire. Like,
yeah.
Oh my god.
No, they sent their message.
Terrifying. So it was definitely a loss. And then whenever they show up, it's totally like they've completely lost their way because they don't have, the kind of, because like with Destiny, I feel like we could always give them the benefit of the doubt that they were working towards a greater goal that we just didn't really know about. Whereas after Destiny, you can just see Mystique is pretty much just like flailing, right? And that goes on for like a very long time.
Right. No, it explains a lot of Mystique in the 90s through the 2000s, where she's just kind of grabbing at like, what am I now? It definitely makes her journey interesting, and stuff too, where she's like, oh, I date Sabretooth now, and you're like, Mystique.
Do you?
Mystique.
And it's just like, man, without Irene, you are having a hard time.
Yeah, she is not grounded without
Irene.
That's
why she was so willing, in the series The Wolverines, where like she was just like, I will sell all of you out just to see my wife again for like 2 seconds.
Well, and that's kind of where we are in X-Men, honestly, where it's like Magneto and Professor X are like, all right, listen to us, and maybe we'll let you see Destiny one day. And she's just it's gonna break her to do things they don't want her to do. And I think the one thing too is like they're so patronizing about it right now.
I know.
It's hard not to be on her side, It
is. I know. It's so messed up. Yeah, I have so many feelings about it. I believe for Comics Beat, I wrote a article that was about Mystique and Destiny's like their love story essentially.
Oh yeah.
I think up to about like X-Men, was it number 7 where she's like, I want my wife back, like that one?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So like I think it was all the way up to that.
Yep. No, I'll definitely have to check out that article if I haven't read it and I'm just forgetting. Because it's interesting. It's an interesting saga and hugely meaningful for where the X-Men are right now. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play out. All right, let's talk real quickly. So we've got like basically 2 stories left. One is like what happens in Amazing Spider-Man with Sebastian Shaw, and then the other one is actually, oddly enough, Captain America with Magneto, having one of the best Magneto stories in my view of all time. Let's talk Spidey first. So we don't have to talk about like everything that's going on in Amazing Spider-Man right now, because it's a lot, and these are this is the saga. Did you read this? Did you reread these stories where he becomes Captain Universe? Because it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I was truly baffled by this. I had no idea what was going on. Which is part of the fun of 90s comics sometimes, right? But yeah, I found it to be quite baffling. I really appreciated like the Eric Larson pencils, and like there was, because that's the one, right? It was Amazing Spider-Man that he was on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. This is when he starts. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I thought that was nice. Like, obviously, there was so many dynamic action scenes, and otherwise, it was a lot like X Factor, where it's just like, what am I reading right now?
Yeah. No, it's a bizarre story. Basically, like, Spider-Man gets the ability, so he gets the powers of Captain Universe, more or less accidentally, which grants him the ability to fly. It grants him, like, even more super strength. Like, he becomes Superman Spider-Man in a way that is super strange and weird to read, but also kind of fun, just because we don't often get to see Peter Parker deal with these powers. The one issue that I find especially interesting from an X-Men perspective is Amazing Spider-Man 328, which is mostly a Spider-Man Hulk fight, but you also get Sebastian Shaw inserting himself into the mix. And this is also, I think it's the last, I don't know if it's the last, but it's one of the last Todd McFarlane drawn Amazing Spider-Mans before he goes in and wants to take on his own Spidey series, which I do love McFarlane's art on Spidey. He's a wonderful, wonderful fit. But yeah, so Sebastian Shaw basically, he steps into a Hulk Magneto Spider-Man showdown, and he's like, this is the place to try out my new Sentinel. Basically, he's like, I need to unleash my Tri-Sentinel, which is basically what it sounds like. It's a triple Sentinel with like 6 arms, and I always find this era and really throughout the 80s, like, I was surprised rereading a lot of this stuff, how integrated Sebastian Shaw is to the Sentinel program.
Oh yeah.
You know, like it's just
nice, Shaw.
yeah. Well, and I kind of never get what he's doing. I kind of never understand it. I guess, you know, on one end he's like I just
billionaire, right?
Yeah, he's just like, I only care about money. I just want to make as much as I can, so I'm gonna like push government and make buck off of producing the Sentinels that they create. But then at the same time, like, he is a mutant. He knows he's a mutant. He's been threatened by both Sentinels and Nimrod in the pages of X-Men. But then when we get to kind of where we are now in this era of Uncanny X-Men, he's literally pushing for Project Nimrod. He's like going to the Senator like, hey, we need a Sentinel that can replicate and regrow itself. I'm like, Shaw, why are you doing this? Like, what?
It seems like it would not be good for you.
No.
But also that's it, right? It's like some weird like meta commentary on on billionaires where it's they really will just like sell out their own interest, you know, just to make a buck. But yeah, it's baffling. He's a baffling character. He really kind of always has been, where you're just like, so why? And he's so spiteful, right? Like, that's part of it too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Like, oh God, the spite from this guy.
Well, and that's in this era too. Like, he's especially spiteful because this is the era where Magneto takes over Shaw's spot in the Hellfire Club, essentially. Like, Shaw's there. They invite Magneto in. This is when he's headmastering the New Mutants for a minute. And but then like Magneto gets everyone to vote Shaw out. So he's like, and that's like his thing, right? Is like power, status, money. If you take those things away from him, that's the way you get to him. And Shaw's like especially bitter at, I guess, mutant kind, but the Hellfire Club in particular for, you know, kicking him out. But yeah, it's just I never quite. I would like to see it come up again in some of the books he's in, like Marauders right now, just to see like. What were you thinking, man? What was the end game?
That about, huh?
Yeah, no, I would like more because he's so integrated into Project Sentinel and Project Nimrod in particular, which is like,
and the X-Men in general, where you're just kind of like, yeah, let's go ahead and figure this guy out, I guess.
Yeah,
he's like still showing up.
Yeah, no, he's got it, and he's got a major role. But yeah, so that's Spidey. In Captain America, we get the Captain America saga at this point, it's written by Mark Gruenwald. It's really good stuff throughout much of the 80s. Red Skull is one of the major players on Acts of Vengeance, right? As is Magneto. And kind of when they're having these little mini council meetings at one point, you know, Magneto asks somebody, I think he asked Loki, he's like, hey, is that the same Red Skull who, was a Nazi in World War II? Like, is that the same guy? And Loki tells him yes, and clearly you can see the wheels turning. Magneto's like, he's going to do something about that, right? Because obviously, as we know, in this period of Claremont sort of rejuvenating and reinvigorating Magneto's backstory, he is, a Holocaust survivor. And Eric Lencher, you know, he escaped Nazi Germany, and that is something that he takes with him, and it adds this layer of nuance and just makes him so interesting as a character that we can be empathetic for, even though he has done these horrible villainous things, of course, right? And what this all builds to is an issue of Captain America 367 where Magneto, it's essentially Magneto hunts the Red Skull. And he comes to his base, the Red Skull's base, and then basically what it becomes is a series of the Red Skull using all of his many classically Silver Age, like, to try to stop Magneto, who can't be stopped. And Magneto, you know, won't be stopped. He's hunting the Skull this whole time, this Nazi, to seemingly to like murder him, but then actually what he does when he catches him is he puts him in a brick room with only water and a little bit of air, Edgar Allan Poe, Cask of Amontillado style, to say like, yes. All right, I'm just going to leave you here to suffer and reflect. I love Magneto Nazi Hunter. Like, I just love that vibe. I love those scenes with the Michael Fassbender era mags in X-Men First Class. I think this is to me is like kind of the prime example of it being done well in the Marvel universe. It's one of my favorite Magneto stories. What did you think of these Cap issues and kind of what they do for Magneto?
Oh, well, I mean, this justifies the whole crossover.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
every bad issue of this crossover or every unrelated, like, wedged in issue of this crossover matters because this issue happened. Because it's so good. Like, what else did we want to see? The second, like, Loki is such a fool because he's like, oh, I'm sure that if I just throw some villains together, and then at the end he's like surprised it doesn't work out, and it's just like, yeah, because you threw like a Holocaust survivor in with somebody who was an active participant in the Holocaust. So, like, what did you think was going to happen? First of all, Loki, like, you're supposed to be a little bit smarter than that.
Yeah.
And secondly, it started from the beginning, right? Like, there was just constantly moments where, like, Red Skull would say something and Magneto would be like, is that Nazi talking again?
Yeah, yeah.
So it was just like, it was just building the whole time. And so, like, once we make it to, like, Magneto finally beats this guy's ass, it is the best. And also, like, Red Skull is the worst villain, right? Like, he's terrible. He's such a awful person. Like, we will never, thank God, see, like, redeemed Red Skull in any kind of a meaningful way, right?
No.
Like, they might be like, alternate universe, Red Skull's not a Nazi or something like that, but they will never try to redeem this guy because he is completely irredeemable. And so watching Magneto just go off on him is so fun. And also just, like, you know, he deserves it. Like, Magneto has found some wild outlets for his anger, you know, throughout life.
Yeah.
And so watching him just get to beat the heck out of Red Skull, and just like everything that the Red Skull's doing, where he's throwing up, it's like he's throwing up traps at Magneto, but he's also throwing up justifications. So he's trying to, like, pull the thing of, like, oh, well, it was fine because, you know, like, I didn't do the thing that hurt you and your family or something, you know, and he's just, like, trying and trying and trying, and Magneto does not care. And this is the Magneto I really love. I appreciated it. I loved it a lot.
Right, and it's such an interesting kind of, like, couple years for Magneto, because he, from, like, after Uncanny X-Men 200, which is the trial of Magneto, when Professor X, you know, almost dying, says, like, all right, I need you to watch over after the school, essentially, and he takes on the headmaster role of the New Mutants, and he's really trying pretty hard to turn over a new leaf, but he just can't quite do it for a number of reasons, a lot of which aren't even, like, it's kind of just like it's just not the role he's cut out for, even though you could make a case that he's actually, like, a more thoughtful headmaster than Professor X. Like,
sure.
Charlie makes plenty of mistakes as well. He does. He really tries. But by the time we get to 89-90, like, there's a reason he's pairing with the villains again, and it's because he said, like, forget it. Like, I tried so hard, everything went wrong. Doug Ramsey died in New Mutants, you know, like, all these things kind of push him and break him back to the point where he's like, all right, forget it. I'm just going to be the villain. And then by the time we get to 91's X-Men #1 with Jim Lee and Chris Claremont, he is full on Magneto, the villain again, right? Like, you know, it's just like it almost strips away some of the nuance. But, you know, so he's building in that way. But even then, even with that, like you said, the Red Skull is evil. Like, the Red Skull embodies evil in the Marvel Universe. Like you said, there's no way, and there's really no ability to generate empathy, nor should there be, for this character. I think Greg Pak wrote a really interesting. He did a series called Magneto Testament, which is about young Magneto in the Holocaust, and then he also, I could be mixing up the creators here. I think it's Greg Pak. There's a Red Skull one, essentially. Kind of like, it's like a flip side of the coin, and it's got that feel where it could be like, oh, are they going to try to, like, make me feel bad for this guy? And it doesn't. It's very smart about the way it handles, like, Red Skull Johann's childhood and kind of his progress into the Red Skull without, you know, kind of absolving him of his evil and of his many misdeeds, to put it mildly. But yeah, so, like, Red Skull, one thing he does here that I really love, and I love Grunwald's writing on it, is, like you were saying, he tries to convince Magneto. He's like, we're not that different, essentially. And, like, he calls out, like, Magneto, you blew up a sub, like, full of humans. You know, like, you have killed for the thing you believe in. Like, and he's basically like, it's a lot of whataboutism. He's like, what about that time you did the same thing as me? And I love, like you said, Magneto's reaction to all of that just being, Yeah, no, I'm not.
I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that doesn't change anything. You're a Nazi. I survived the Holocaust. We're not gonna play those games.
And we're not the same. Like,
Yeah.
there's something very important about that. Like, even though, to the people that Magneto has hurt, probably he does look quite the same. But the thing is that, we're looking at this from the outside. And so there's always going to be at least a little bit of a difference between somebody who is just like an outright fascist and somebody who is a little bit more nuanced, right?
Right.
Not necessarily that their crimes should be treated differently in a court of law, but hey, I'm not a judge. How would I know? So I think that, yeah, this is a really good story. I appreciated it so much. I also appreciate when somebody does tell a story that kind of shows a lot of like, because yeah, I mean, if you watch like documentaries about like post World War II Germany and stuff, and like people would be like, oh, let's just forget about it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, that didn't erase like all of the pain. And I understand everything, about that. But it's also like watching the Red Skull try to kind of like use those arguments to his benefit is just like even more infuriating for me. And then you look at Magneto and you're like, yeah, he's livid right now. Like,
Yeah.
He's just so angry at everything that this guy's saying. And it's like, you'll never not be angry, Magneto. I'm sorry. You like lived through a lot. And one of them is like listening to this guy right now.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. It's the best. It was like my favorite part of, I think, the entire crossover. And there's a lot of fun in this crossover. So that's saying a lot.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely my favorite X-Men adjacent issue. I think the Daredevil versus Ultron stuff is so good. I really love it. And that Innocenti John Romita Jr. run is definitely one that has grown on me a ton over this last kind of year of rereading it a lot as well, where there's a lot of blind spots that I had in there where I didn't necessarily know certain stories. Like there's a great Christmas story where like Daredevil has a drink with Mephisto in a bar, and it's like there's stuff like that. But the Ultron Acts of Vengeance is awesome. I would recommend people check out the Punisher Doctor Doom issues. I'm not a big Punisher fan, honestly. And those are very fun because Doctor Doom, he goes up to Kingpin, like in one of their Acts of Vengeance council meetings, and he's like, "So I heard you have a Punisher problem." And Kingpin's like, it's fine, like I got it." And then Doom's like, "All right, you dare me to do it? Do you dare me to take on the Punisher?" And Kingpin's like, "What? No." And Doctor Doom's like, "Fine, I'll do it. I can't believe you said I couldn't do it." And then he takes him on. It's great.
Yeah, this is a fun crossover. It is ridiculous. It's like so loosely related that you're just kind of like, I guess it's a crossover. But and then also once again, like I had read all of this stuff. I definitely read the Innocenti like that era of Daredevil, of course, multiple times. But once again, all of these stories are so unrelated to each other that you can read them without having any context for the other stuff that happens.
Right. Yeah. No, I think the modern parallel is probably like Dark Reign, like 2008, 2009 era Marvel. It's like it's a banner on everything, or even like what's the one DC just did? You're the Villain, which I don't think is as successful, but same idea. It's just like it's a banner on everything, but they're doing their own stories, they're doing their own thing, with the exception of... the weird thing with Acts of Vengeance is, like, I don't even hardly know what the core is. I mean, I guess it's, like, maybe some John Byrne Avenger stuff, but, like, there's really barely a core to it, which makes it unique.
It's true. It is. It's very odd, but it does ring true of exactly that era. To me, I was just like, yeah, this is 100% just, like... sit back and enjoy your tour through this era of comics, pretty much.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, so we are at an hour. Sarah, thanks so much for being generous with your time, especially putting up with the technical difficulties we had getting this thing going.
Yes.
Those of you who are on, if you have a kind of a fire round here of questions, fire sale for questions, there's got to be a better phrase for that. But if you want to get in some questions here quick in the chat, we might have like 5 or 10 minutes to tackle kind of whatever you got for me or for Sarah here. Otherwise, coming up next time, we're going to be back in a couple weeks. We'll continue the 90s X-Men Reading Club, and we will talk New Mutants 87 to 94. Again, you can check the details here, the description on the video for what comics we're going to be reading week in and week out. I'll be trying to keep it at approximately like a 2-week cadence, basically just oscillating here and there based on schedules and just availability. But basically, again, we'll just do kind of these more casual sort of live conversations, talking the comics that we've all read, and addressing your thoughts and questions on the matter as they come up. Okay, so that's the plan for this. But again, like, we'll be progressing through. Hopefully, we can have Sarah back on for some additional X-Men comics here in the coming months as well. But it shouldn't be too rapid a clip for those of you who have a lot going on and a lot of comics to read.
Yes, that's me. I have so many comics to read.
I know. I have so much catching up. I have so much catching up. It's crazy. But it's good, crazy. It's a good problem to have for sure. Good privilege to have to read a bunch of comics. Sarah, where should people find you, and kind of where can they find your stuff coming up?
Yeah, so just follow me on Twitter, and I'm at Sarah Century, SARACENTURY, and then sarahcentury.com too. I haven't updated my website in a really long time, but I should be doing that sometime soon. In the meantime, Twitter is going to be the place because I'm doing such a combination of, comic book Herald articles, a bunch of other articles for other websites, and then also a bunch of fiction. So
nice.
Kind of all over the place. Probably just check the Twitter if you can.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we'll put a link here in the description as well. We do have a question here from Micah. It says, who would be a good villain mix-up for the X-Men to fight if there was a new Acts of Vengeance today in the Krakoa era? I actually think the X-Men verse like Killmonger, or like take something out of it, because they have these kind of like frenemy things going on with Wakanda, But I'm like, lose the Black Panther connection, lose the T'Challa Storm connection, where we know ultimately they like kind of love each other, and like don't wanna be doing what they're doing. Take that away and have it be someone who's like, no, I'm thinking about Wakanda a different way. Let's get Killmonger. Let's get some of those villains from the nation of Wakanda actually taking on Krakoa. I think would be interesting. Like, what is the viewpoint of Wakandans who are like, yeah, Krakoa is a problem and we don't like what they've done. I think that could be pretty cool.
That would be extremely cool. The first one that sprang to my mind was Kang. Have they ever done anything with Kang? Because I've never heard of that. And if so, it would be so awesome to watch, especially this era of X-Men, for them to start doing time jump stuff. And because as wild and kind of like lawless as this era already is, like they do already do a little bit of time jumping, right? Like we see like jump to future stories, alternate reality stories. Yeah, I would just love Kang, I guess, to come in and do his whole villainous rambling and, hopefully be slightly less of a creep than he usually is, but...
Fingers are not crossed,
Yeah, fingers are not crossed.
That's a good pick. I like that, because you got, because they haven't really dealt a ton in this current era with, like, the time travel aspects, and, like, because obviously you got Cable, you got Bishop, you got, I don't know, like, Trevor Fitzroy, you got all these characters. They haven't tackled a ton of, like, well, all right, so precognitive mutants aren't allowed, but what about mutants who, like, literally come from other futures? It's a little... Like
Rachel, right?
Rachel Summers, yeah, right? Like, so it's a lot of stuff that's kind of up in the air. King, I think... I mean, he's got that role in Uncanny Avengers, that is, like, mutant adjacent.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's got the Apocalypse Twins there, but otherwise I don't know if there's a real big King X-Men story. I dig that. All right, so we got a question here from Fresh News. He says, if we get an Ultimate Universe Marvel reboot, will it pick up from where we left off, or will we get a rebooted universe? You get 4 titles. So I think reboot for sure. I think's got to be the vote there. What 4 titles would you reboot your Ultimate Universe with, Sarah?
Oh, wow. So I'm going to say New Mutants would be maybe my top one. New Warriors maybe, and then what else? Of course, I just want to maybe stick with like a couple of the classics like Avengers. Actually, I would go with Avengers West Coast, and then maybe I don't know, maybe like Uncanny X-Force or something.
Okay, cool. I'm into that. I think Eternals would be a really interesting one to reboot with because of the MCU connection and because of the fact that like Kieran Gillen and Issa Rivich are doing a really interesting Eternals relaunch of sorts, but they're still tied to the 616. I would actually like to see creators take on like, if you could just totally refresh this Eternals concept, how would you do it? I think that could be a lot of fun. If it wasn't an MCU thing, I don't know that it would make a lot of sense, but it is. So I think that would be interesting. Well, my idea actually is, I think the Ultimate Universe should reboot as one oversized anthology, and it should just be the Marvel Ultimate Universe. It's like 72 or 90 pages, this big thing, and you just get like 12-page stories of like everyone in the Ultimate Universe.
Oh, neat. Yeah, that'd be cool.
I just think like that would, like, why not, instead of trying to get people to pick up monthlies again, the way that you're used to with your 616 comics, like why not do basically like a book every month that is just the whole Marvel Universe? That would be like the thing for new readers to pick up. It would be the easiest way in. It would kind of get you to compete with manga a little bit, you know?
Right, because that's like the Shonen Jump format, right? Where it's just like a bunch of different stories.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I would love to see them do with the Ultimate Universe. But I don't know. I don't know if they necessarily think in those terms. It'd be cool if they push the ball on that. Because I don't know, you see DC playing with it right now, even like with anthology format type stuff, and
yeah,
it's interesting to consider like where this form might be going. All right, let's see if there's anything that really jumps out. Did Storm and Black Panther have kids in an alternate Marvel story like the cartoon?
Has to be, right?
There's a what is it? Storm and Forge have kids in an alternate future that are wiped out by Nimrod. That is in the 2000s Yost and Kyle New Mutants, I want to say.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So there's do Storm and T'Challa. I don't know that have they done, because they have like the alternate reality, like Danielle Cage is Captain America in, is it 2099, or maybe it's the Old Man universe, whatever. But what about the children of Storm and T'Challa? There's got to be something. I'm sure that exists. I just don't know a lot about it.
Yeah, I guess not.
I'm sure if we Google it, we'll find something. All right, cool. Any final questions? Otherwise, I think we'll wrap it here. Sarah, I can let you go. And yeah, this was fun. Thanks so much for taking the time, Sarah, and appreciate it. I think we will talk soon, because I think you're going to be on for My Marvelous Year here in the near future.
Next week.
Okay, yeah, coming up soon.
That's when we recorded anyway. That's probably not when people can hear it.
Yeah, okay, cool. So that'll be fun. But yeah, people check out My Marvelous Year and check out all Sarah's stuff, of course. Find her on Twitter, @SarahSentry, and we'll include links in the show notes. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, this was super fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.
All right, thanks everybody for hopping on the live stream. I think we are going to call it. I will answer like one or two more questions for those of you who are hanging around. I've got a few minutes to do so. So let's see. We got questions here in the chat. Do you think Jean Grey's nephew and niece would return, the children of Sarah? I don't know the current status of Jean Grey's family, I will admit. I mean, if they are dead and they're not mutants, no, I don't. Because obviously they would not go through Krakoan resurrection protocols, despite their connections to Jean Grey. You know, this actually reminds me of something that just kind of occurred to me in the most recent issue of X Factor, which I did not do a full review of. Just because I liked it, I enjoyed it, I just didn't have a ton to say about it. But there is a moment towards the end where Northstar's husband, Kyle, he comes in and he finds him resurrected. And, you know, it occurred to me that he happened to be out of the Boneyard when it was haunted, okay? And basically the whole X Factor unit was killed. And if he had been there, you know, he might also have been killed. He's a human, right? That's Kyle's human husband. He easily, Krakoa would not resurrect him. I feel like there are some dramatic issues that could arise here from, you know, human ties that mutants have that would not be placed through the resurrection protocols because of the very strict Krakoan only mutants laws. I think there's some interesting stories and some you know, sad stories to be told potentially along those lines, even though the fact that, like, you know, we have the death of death in the Krakoa era of X-Men, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, but I think, you know, if you have human relatives, although Sarah Grey, I will say, so this is Jean's sister, There is some textual evidence from like, what is it? It's like Bizarre Adventures. It's like a really weird 80s black and white backup. There's some textual evidence that she might have like latent telepathic abilities. And then the question would be like, is she secretly X gene positive, you know, or something like that. So you could make a case for Sarah Gray coming back. It's not something I think about a lot. The Gray family dynamics, I will say, it doesn't come up a ton. Okay, I got time for like one more question here as I scan through the chat. Again, thanks everybody for listening so much. Again, the issues that we're going to read on the next 90s X-Men Reading Club are in the description. We're going to do New Mutants 87 to 94, kind of the debut of, not the kind of, it is the debut of Cable in the Marvel Universe. It is Rob Liefeld's kind of like star turn on New Mutants. So it'll be a really interesting bunch to talk about. We're going to go through that in a live stream. I think it'll be like March 27th, so we'll do like 2 weeks from now. Okay. And all right, so let's see. How long did Franklin Richards control the Phoenix Force? That's an interesting question. Phoenix stuff, man. Phoenix stuff right now is all over the map. Like I have no idea what Marvel is doing with the Phoenix. In particular, the Jason Aaron ongoing in Avengers. Like, and we've talked about, you know, in I did a video at Krakin Krakoa on Jason Aaron's use of the Phoenix in basically like his retcon of like mutants existing in prehistory, the way he's doing with Avengers BC, you know, 1 million or whatever. And I just like, they kind of, I don't even want to spoil this stuff until I have like full thoughts on it. But my thinking on Avengers Phoenix stuff is until it comes up in the pages of X-Men and I have to go back and read the Avengers stuff to explain it, it's kind of just like, I'm like basically treating it as not canon. I mean, I know it is. Like, I know Aaron's Avengers is, but it's just such a strange run. I don't love it. It's okay. It's fine. I like Jason Aaron a lot. I've liked a lot of his comics. I really love Wolverine and the X-Men. But the stuff he's doing with the Phoenix right now is so weird, and I don't understand the purpose behind it, that I don't really want to see it carried through to the pages of X-Men. And I don't think X-Men will do a lot of Phoenix-heavy stuff. I think Jonathan Hickman's too smart for that until we get pretty late stage, until we get kind of endgame, you know, because we know one of the things the Phalanx is scared of is the Phoenix. It was like Galactus and the Phoenix, okay? So that type of language doesn't get dropped that specifically unless there's a plan for it. But I just can't imagine stuff happening with the Phoenix and Avengers is really going to impact the long game plan that Hickman had for the X-Men, you know? So for me, I'm kind of like, I'm on a Phoenix continuity pause until the dust settles, okay, and we know what the heck netted out here, and even then I'm like, until it's in the pages, I don't know, I'm like, until stuff happens in X-Men comics, it's not as canon for me, you know, it's not as important for me until it gets referenced there. Once it does, then it's like, all right, we gotta acknowledge that like this is happening in the Marvel Universe and this impacts X-Men, but the Phoenix stuff I'm just kind of willing to let lie. All right, that's going to do it for me. I'm going to go. Thanks, guys. I'm Dave. You can find my stuff at comicbookherald.com. Again, I am, I produce all these Krakin Krakoa videos online. Thanks so much for your support and for joining on a live stream like this. Again, casual 90s X-Men conversation is going to be coming over the next few weeks, so I look forward to seeing some of you come back for that and getting your questions and comments and have a good chat. So thanks, everybody, for joining. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll be back this week, this Wednesday, with more Krakin Krakoa. Thanks, everybody, for listening.